Explained by the Billy Meier contacts. Mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Extraterrestrials Part 2 Note. This section generally deals with the existence of various extraterrestrial civilizations, their histories, societies, cultures, behaviors, technologies, etc. An excellent summary of the UFO, extraterrestrial phenomenon, is given by Billy Meier in his article Extraterrestrials, found in Contact Report 257. Drawings and photorealistic renditions of some extraterrestrials may be seen at the end of Contact Reports 830 and 836. A list of extraterrestrials who have contacted Billy Meier can be found at the FIGU website. Contact Report 050.
Then you are really getting me agitated.
I do not want to, although I would like to know what you look like with an angry face. It still has to look lovely and nice. Can you be angry at all? Do you even know that in this form as we know it?
Sure, we are not above these things either. However, we are able to control ourselves much better, and accordingly, it takes longer before we lose control. Now take off your outer clothing. Here, this device will regenerate your broken ribs. All you have to do is sit here between these two poles. The rib bones will be completely regenerated after the process. Nothing will indicate that they were broken anymore. Now stay in this position for a few minutes. The whole thing is very inflamed, especially the periosteum. Unfortunately, I cannot eliminate the inflammation with this device. It would probably need about 2 months to flatten out. I will make sure it heals next time with a special apparatus. But it must be a joke, because if this alleged event were actually a real event, it would be a complete natural law-based adversity, which should be known to us without any doubt, because our geological forces register and analyze everything without the possibility of an exception. On our part, we have very little accumulation of waste. However, the resulting material is converted into usable soil and other substances in robot-operated conversion plants. This requires a very advanced technology, of which the humans on Earth are not yet capable of. In relation to this, however, the Earth humans have a similar form of the transformation of waste into soil and other substances. However, this Earth technology functions on a completely different basis than ours.
Do you drink and smoke?
No, we're not familiar with smoking. Drinking, according to earthly terms, is also unknown to us, although we also have drinks that are similar to alcoholic beverages.
Have you found out anything about the strange 3 dots through which I was bombarded by very negative rays in my workspace?
For this, we need a special device, which is already made by one of our technicians. We were unable to analyze anything with our previous equipment.
Contact Report 051.
Now I finally see you angry for once.
It is not easy for me, because I am really angry. But the human beings of the Earth are often able to make my self-control collapse with their illogicality and unreasonableness. I did not think it was possible to ever lose control of myself.
You are only human, though much further up than us earthworms.
Contact Report 052.
But would it be possible for you now to give me 2 or 3 pieces of your food? You know, I am thinking of little tablets or whatever.
The next time I would have to bring it with me, the best would be something similar to what is on Earth, something that can also be produced here.
Thank you, as you think. Maybe it is better so. Because if it is something strange, then there might be difficulties. You know what people are like.
Contact Report 053.
Slowly, I find my way in the Earth-human manner of conceptualizing and thinking. I also have to learn these things first, and we are not immune to mistakes.
Contact Report 054.
In Asket's picture, it was found that she has much longer earlobes, which have also grown much further forward than is the case with us earthworms. What is the reason for this?
I understand. It is a purely anatomical difference.
Does it not have any connection with higher intelligence, etc.?
No.
So the meaning of the speech is simply that it is a pure race characteristic, a pure anatomical difference without any intelligence evaluation meaning.
Certainly.
But tell me, do you all have blue eyes?
Our eye colors are as diverse as they are on the Earth.
But yours are a pretty nice blue. They are a really enjoyable sight.
You love to compliment, thank you. This is my natural eye color, but we women also like to color our eyes. We call my home world on our Pleiades era, and it belongs to the solar system Taygete, along with 9 other worlds.
How long have you been stationed on the Earth, and how long has the station been in Switzerland?
I have been entrusted with tasks on the Earth for 72 years. But my fixed time is only 4 Earth years. Our station in this country was built just over 300 years ago.
Would you rather tell me how many other alien races are actually still stationed on the Earth?
There are 7 more of them.
Do you have all the stations here, and are you in contact with them?
Certainly, they all have stations on Earth, as well as we all have connections and collaborations with them, because they all belong to our Federation's realm. Thus, I am just talking about our people.
Are the Giza intelligences included in these 7 races?
They are not.
But may you explain to me how your communication works over great distances? I mean, what technological form do you use?
I can explain a few things to you, but it is not too much. Our one technical communication possibility you would call radio, but with the possibility of no delay in transmission. Also, the transmission does not take place through the normal space, but in use of the hyperspace, through which we pass our signals, disassembled, with faster-than-light particles, which spread over the whole hyperspace in fractions of -seconds due to their millionfold speed of light, and thus form again at the same moment at the target.
What you are explaining to me is a mystery, because I do not know anything about these things. However, I have probably understood a few things, for example, the disassembling of the signals. Could it be a distortion taking place in some distortion device?
No, the disassembling is a universal expansion of the signals and impulses in relation to the speed, with just the signals and impulses charged faster than light particles, which you call tachyons.
Simya-se deals with a device and then obviously talks to Quetzal in her mother tongue, which I unfortunately do not understand.
Quetzal will endeavor to find the person with his area analyzer and will also carry out the evaluation immediately. We should be expecting his result in about 20 minutes.
You said you called your home planet Era. How many human beings live there?
500 million. Approximately.
Fine, you will not have mass pileups because of overpopulation. But now, in connection with this question, I would be interested to know how many planets are inhabited in the Taygete system. You were talking about your home planet and 9 more.
Sure, in addition to my homeworld, there are 3 other planets that are habitable and inhabited. All others are already subject to die-off or are only beginning to form.
But something else. You know, we do astrology on Earth, right?
Of course, it is a science that can be traced back to our ancestors and which we still cultivate today. With you, however, it has lost most of its actual values and truths.
I am aware of that. But how does astrology work for you?
In the same forms as on Earth, of course, but with different planets and different overall perspectives.
Unfortunately, I do not know too much about these things. But what about your birthday? If you convert it to our time, when were you born?
To answer that question, I need to explain some important facts. For example, when I talk about Teget or Alcyon, I am always referring to the whole system, not the sun or a planet itself. So I am from Taget, that is from the system Teget, but born on the planet Era. This, my homeworld, is very similar to the Earth in all things, which is why it was chosen by our ancestors as a new homeworld at the earliest times, after they had left the Earth. Thus, all data of the planet corresponds approximately to those of Earth, with only small differences. The orbit around the Sun is 365 1-4 days, according to earthly time calculation, while 1 day according to your time is 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 14 seconds. This results in almost exactly the same orbit and time of day as Earth has. In contrast, other planets show differences, like also in the Sol system or at all other systems in the universe in general. All our time units are named differently with us than with you, but with only small differences, they coincide with the earthly time units. So an ODUR is equivalent to a few fractions of a second of your hour, and even a musel corresponds pretty much to an earthly day. Our year we have divided into 13 asar, which means 13 months, with a compensation period of 23 years. So you can see that we are only slightly different from your calculations. Our 13 months can be divided also into your 12 months by the conversion, after which I would be born then, according to your question, after earthly calculation, on the 7th of February.
So you would be an Aquarius too, according to our astrological data. That is almost crazy. It is just Aquarians everywhere.
You are not wrong, for according to our calculations, the day of my birth would fall into the sign of Aquarius. These constellations have been known on Earth since ancient times by our common ancestors, and the same images have also been passed down to us. Seen from our Pleiades, however, their positions are very shifted, and so, seen for us, they result in a different arrangement and a different picture. Our astrology, however, is naturally based on different constellations and values in our space structure than is the case on the Earth.
Contact Report 055.
The work ahead is very difficult and usually takes 3 to 4 weeks. Since we do not have this time available, however, we must limit ourselves to only 7 hours. Unfortunately, I can only connect you to our apparatuses for a few factors, so you have to master most of what you are learning with your own power. I love children very much.
But what can you tell us about siblings?
There's still a brother and a sister. Sure, my brother is called Yucatan, the Quick One, and my sister Plagia, the one who honors the laws of sevenness.
That is interesting. Is your sister black-haired?
Sure, but how do you know that?
Well then, another thing. It is also a question from a child. How old is your father, Ptah?
759 years.
Is that after our time or after yours?
It is calculated according to your time. By the way, it was unreasonable of you to take her Amadestetter to the glade. You know that I am not allowed to talk to her and that I cannot do it for my own sake. On the other hand, consider the Earth-human vibrations that are dangerous for us.
Contact Report 057.
Unfortunately, the last time I asked a question, I forgot to ask Coney. He wanted to know if the doctors on your home planet also know the diseases that we have on the Earth. He probably means whether these evils are also rampant on your homeworld, or simply present. He also specifically asks about the so-called cancer. He also wants to know if you have or know other pathological evils, or if you have simply defeated the diseases.
Our scientists have already defeated many so-called diseases centuries or even millennia ago, but even today, illnesses of a diseased nature, transmitted from earlier times, still prevail on other planets. But they are no longer deadly or physically destructive in any form. In the main, they are evils of a minor nature, such as colds, etc., which can also result in pneumonia and the like, but which we are usually able to bring under control very quickly if they do not degenerate. This is also the case with other evils. We are only human life forms like the inhabitants of the earth, so we are also susceptible to certain things of a diseased nature, but are usually able to control and heal them very quickly before they really break out. There are also certain evils with us which are unknown on the earth, but to which our science has also become master. In the case of the cancer, etc., you mentioned, which is embodied in a parasitic, malfunctioning life, it has to be said that fortunately, we have long since banished and conquered these diseases. This, however, was only possible when our humanity and our scientists abandoned certain negating and negative attitudes and actions, etc., and began to think and act in new forms.
So that means you cannot tell us how we can fight these nasty diseases?
With this, you unfortunately speak the truth, because the Earth human must acquire the necessary knowledge himself or herself in this regard, because they grow in themselves through it, and will understand many things only through it, and learn the right manner of acting. We do not have the right to influence and advance a human evolution more than is possible according to all creational natural laws and recommendations, and according to the respective level of evolution of a life form.
How many humans of your race currently live on the Earth?
Overall, there are 114.
This is a quick one. What do you call your son Taget in your own language?
Similar to yours, namely Taget.
Aha. And what is the diameter of your home planet Era in your Pleiades system?
It is very much like Earth's, as I explained earlier.
All right. Then a question that you have already answered sufficiently, and which must therefore seem illogical to you. Have some of you incarnated on the Earth?
You know that this is impossible because none of us died on the Earth, so you ask very illogically.
The next question relates to the troposphere of Era. What gases and substances does it consist of?
It is almost identical to the Earth. The tropospheres of our worlds usually contain between 75 and 70% nitrogen, 25 to 29% oxygen, and 1% trace gases such as carbon dioxide, argon, etc. Era itself has a higher oxygen content with 32.4%. Traces of argon and other gases are found at only 0.3% and nitrogen 67.3%. However, this refers only to the planet Era, as I have explained.
That's good, but you are obviously talking about the atmosphere, although the question is related to the troposphere.
It is one and the same thing, because usually you call the troposphere the lowest layer of the atmosphere for simplicity's sake, simply the atmosphere, which, however, viewed from bottom to top, is composed of the troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, and thermosphere.
But how great is the surface gravity of Era?
The surface gravity is 1.0 according to the Earth's basic measure, i.e. slightly more than the surface gravity of the Earth. The density is 5.521, the axis inclination 22.99 degrees, and the equator diameter 12.749. collided, whereby the escape velocity of 11.19 kilometers per second is to be mentioned.
But can you now tell me how many years your race has already mastered space travel? By which I mean your ancestors up to the most ancient generations?
It has already been 27 million years since our first ancestors built the first space-worthy flying vehicles. It was about 6,000 years before the Great Catastrophe when the destroyer breached into the home systems.
You said you were 114 people in total here on the Earth. Is this number constant?
No, it varies from month to month. Often we are less than 50, then again more than 300.
Well, that depends on your duties, right?
Sure, but also with the transport of our food and other necessary things.
The question now is whether you also know something in this form. Whether you swallow any medication or the like in order to keep the offspring rate within limits, which does not work with us despite the pill.
No, we do not need these things, because in observance of the natural laws and recommendations, we align with their order and abide by the periodic rules.
So does this mean that you only make sexual love when this coincides with the female infertility period?
This is not quite so, because human life forms remain human life forms as long as they are bound to physical bodies. Sexual needs also come to light outside the infertility period of a woman, so that the needs must also be met outside this period. However, in order not to produce offspring, there are many natural aids which we always observe and apply, but this does not rule out the possibility that exceptions may come to light and offspring may be produced unintentionally. However, every woman of our race has the technological means to detect an unwanted pregnancy within 3 days. If this is the case, then natural preparations trigger early menstruation, whereby the fertilized egg is rejected before it is able to develop. Therefore, no abortion procedure, according to an earthly sense, takes place because no spirit-bearing life is destroyed by it. As you know, only at the beginning of the heart's activity and therefore 3 weeks after procreation, does the spirit become established in a life form of a human being, so that through this process of a prematurely triggered early menstruation, only the substantial basic substances are ejected and no life is destroyed.
But if I have understood you correctly, then you only use purely natural remedies for contraception, such as the one that you simply jump off the train in Orlikon and do not drive right through to Zurich, right?
I find it admirable how you can describe and paraphrase these concerns. Yes, it is one of our natural remedies.
Well, I do not want to ask what the other means are, because surely they are very diverse.
Sure, but the harmony between man and woman is necessary in all events. Otherwise, it would be unpleasant for one or the other partner.
But now a question that concerns us all. You know how we earthworms grapple with so-called professions. So our question now just refers to what you have actually learned as a profession.
I understand, even if we do not interpret our activities in your form. But when I have to talk about a profession, it gets a bit complicated, because I have learned several of them according to earthly human concepts. My tasks are closely connected with my learned knowledge, which relates to spiritual education, coordination, technology, archaeology research through time travel into the past, earthly religion, politics and economics, earthly history of humankind, and various other things for which I am taught and trained in every single value. It is not the same with us as with you, because you learn only 1 or 2 professions or fields of knowledge, because with us we usually master 12 to 30 and more fields of knowledge. Our earliest ancestors also moved through the air with extremely primitive combustion motor devices, but today it seems to us to be very adventurous, barbaric, and outrageous.
This phenomenon is a teleprojection on our part for the purpose of triggering memory. The beings wrapped in white clothes embody our ancestors from a period of approximately 70,000 years ago, who came to Earth at that time, but who did not live in fixed houses, but in their free-floating beam ships, which they had stationed mainly over forests. The man dressed in the wonderful robe with the adorning stars was the HWH of this emigration group, whose most distant descendants still live somewhere on the Earth as their own smallest group of former extraterrestrials, but whom we have not yet been able to find by any means imaginable. In the meantime, we could only find out with certainty that Amata, from her old personalities, must today be a very distant descendant of the brother of the former YHW, which means that this group of extraterrestrials, who as mentioned were a part of our ancestors, must have mixed with terrestrial people here on Earth and forgot their actual origin. And to find out how these connections extend now, and how and where today's descendants of these ancestors live, is one of our tasks, and that is why we also are making an effort for Amata. Our ancestors and us in former times were called sons of heaven by the Earth humans. The white figures Amata had seen on the opposite balconies are teleprojections of the old venerable ones of long-gone times. These are the beings who begat and ruled the white earthly human races. But there are also their descendants among them who in peaceful form pushed forward and determined, up to a certain value, the later earthly development of humankind. So they are the true ancestors of the white earthly human race, while the people in gray working clothes, the folk, as Amata calls them, represent earthly mankind in all its colors and races of today, standing next to a large platform. The venerables, dressed in white mentioned above, are and were the origin of all human life existing on the earth today in their known form. Everything was determined and directed and partly pre-programmed by them, but this never elevates them to hierarchical forces or powers, because such values do not exist.
Contact Report 058.
The first refers again to the pill. You once told me that you were going to put some contraceptives in your food to keep the birth rate under control. The last time you made contact, however, you said completely different things.
Then you asked the questions very imprecisely. It is true that we add natural herbal contraceptives to our food. However, this only refers to the fact that this form of contraception is used when there is an excess birth rate. That is to say, when overpopulation problems occur. This method is usually used when a race has reached the point where it recognizes that a planet can only carry and feed a certain number of human life forms without artificial intervention. So this is related to the evolution of mind and consciousness. Otherwise, however, it is also the case that all human life forms in our worlds can voluntarily obtain the foods containing contraceptives in order to be able to regulate the number of births. Not everyone does. However, because human beings prefer to use other methods of contraception, although the active ingredients are not harmful in any way, which unfortunately cannot always be said of your contraceptives. In general, the ingesting of these foods interspersed with active substances does not therefore occur, so everything can be taken purely voluntarily. A general mandatory taking of birth control has to be reintroduced in order to bring about a normal birth rate adapted to the respective world.
Explain to him Billy's colleague Kobe that even we cannot avoid doing our daily work, albeit not to the extent that is customary with you. On our home worlds, all people work their daily workload, but so do we, who have our tasks here on the earth, although our hours of employment are much higher than our home worlds and your working hours. Our hours of occupation are usually 16 of the earthly hours per day, often even more. You should also go now and bring Amata here. Here, take this. Let her chew it and eat it.
Contact Report 060.
But now another question. The next sun system seen from us belongs to the Centauri group. To my knowledge is the first Proxima Centauri, then Alpha Centauri, and Beta Centauri, which by us, though, is being called something else, namely the Barnard star, or similar, which is at a distance of a little bit more than 6 light-years away from us. Now, are you informed about whether any humans live in those sun systems who come to Earth?
Certainly. I myself know. There, in other space-time structures, several dear friends in all 3 systems, although only in the Barnard system, meaning Beta Centauri, can it be discovered from Earth that small planets are circling around the sun there. But why do you ask?
It is kind of a weird story. Do you perhaps know a certain Athar and Kohun?
These are 2 dear friends of mine from the region of Proxima Centauri, but from where have you got their names? You seem to be informed about certain things from which I, so far up to now, have not given you any knowledge about.
Perhaps, but nevertheless tell me. Since when have these dear Athar and the Kohun been operating on Earth? And do they stay in contact with any humans on the Earth?
They come here often. They probably maintain contact, but not, however, in a very extensive form. They had the last important contact more than 50 years ago with a man from Germany, who also had permission to portray them very accurately. I knew nothing about all this.
There you see, even you are not all-knowing.
That I have also never claimed.
Okay, I'm just playing with you.
Contact Report 061.
Are these really pictures of my ship?
Certainly. I and Mr. Moosebrugger have also captured crazy apparitions, although we have only seen your ship.
It is puzzling to me. May I register the images?
What do you mean with that?
I will transfer the image forms to a device, after which we can then try to make an analysis.
Some school children want to give you a kitten. Will you take this?
It is an extraordinary pleasure to hear this offer, but we are not allowed to do such things.
Too bad. Do you not keep pets and such?
Sure. We also have pets, even cats and dogs, which have been brought from the Earth to our Plei-Aran worlds in former times, but which we do not keep in the living rooms, as you unhygienically and health-harmingly do. We must not, however, acquire terrestrial animals because they contain certain germs which no longer appear in our animals and which can also be transferred back to the animals through human life forms. This is a safety regulation, why we are not allowed to keep earthly animals.
I understand that, because we too have such provisions between our countries. But you would have the possibility of a complete disinfection, etc., would you not?
Sure, but it is our peoples and our understanding that determine whether we need an animal from another world. But such decisions only take place when it is a requirement for one of our worlds.
Tell me, what kind of administration do you have on your Plei-Ars? I mean, a government administration.
I told you that before. There is no administration here, only the High Council. Its form is to give high advice, but never an order or an enactment in commanding form.
What do you usually wear for shoes? But not always these boot things like you and the others, right?
Our footwear is similar to yours, but it does not consist of animal skins, but of materials that we artificially produce. So is the clothing. It is very similar to the one you will be using in about 70 years.
So for us something like utopian or futuristic.
Not exactly, but purposeful. Perhaps still somewhat strange for the terrestrial human being today. Minara takes over my task here on Earth for the time being until the turn of the year. During this time, Quetzal, I and the rest leave our station and Earth to return to our home worlds. According to earthly terms, we take what you call a vacation.
But now I would be surprised. You have such beautiful black eyes, which fit perfectly to your dark skin. Here on Earth, in Africa, we have a human race which we call the Hottentots, and which has quite significant European influences. Askett once explained to me in former times that this mixture of races had developed with actual Negroes and whites, or something similar. Is that correct? Menada, our race actually originated in very early times on this earth, because our ancestors mixed with Earthlings and produced the so-called tribes of the Huns, who later joined together with Negro tribes in the African region for a very short time. From it, new races developed, so among other things over a very long period lead to the Hottentot. Some of these tribes reconnected with our later ancestors, and begat with them our race existing today. By the way, can you tell me what you call your mother tongue?
Do you think of our language today or of our original language?
The one which you speak today.
This is what we call Sarat.
A little weird. Is this Saratian a standard language?
On our world, yes, but not on all other worlds, for as with you, different languages prevail. But it is the case that all human life forms united with us speak a unified language, which you could call an intercosmos language. This language leads beyond our galaxy, and we call it the Kosan language.
Very nice. How is that with you, Minara? You certainly have a special language of your own, don't you? What do you call it? Minara, Jenan.
Contact Report 062.
Please tell him, Herbert Runkle, that he does not need to thank us, because everything is given by us in honest love.
Can you tell me how many years Minara, or her people, are ahead of our overall technological evolution?
They are 350 years. 350 years less than with us.
How is that possible?
When Minara's people left the Earth, they had the same level as our people. But through Askett's civilization, our people were raised 350 years higher, while the other peoples are still in the stage of being taught quickly, because they were given this opportunity only a few years later.
What do you do with any items that get lost, and that you cannot get back for any reason? You know, what do you do when you just cannot get it back? Maybe because it is in another person's possession.
Your question is not crazy, but very reasonable. But why do you ask?
It's because I have heard that some objects simply disappeared or burned or somehow dissolved when they were found by terrestrial people and when the objects belonged to some kind of alien intelligence.
The reason for this lies in a total elimination of these objects. We and many other intelligences are able to totally eliminate lost things in various forms or simply burn them to ashes. This happens by very far-reaching impulse transmitters, which are set into operation by a destruction mechanism built into each device. However, these destruction mechanisms are usually only built into devices and objects that we take with us to foreign and still lowly developed worlds, for safety reasons, so that the relevant, still low-standing life forms of a planet do not get a hold of possibilities for advancement which would be dangerous for them. These devices or objects equipped with such destruction mechanisms are usually made of plastic, for example, this small device here.
What is this white thing?
It is a selective warner.
What is this white thing?
It is a warning device that indicates to me with a fine singing tone that if, for example, someone is approaching us now and whose brainwave patterns are not recorded in the device, by which I thus mean that it registers them.
Aha, and if you lose that, you might be in a lot of trouble, huh?
Certainly not, because we always carry a second device with us. You see this one on the belt here.
Okay, you got me. But can you perhaps demonstrate to me how you can destroy such a thing?
For the purpose of your education, sure. Look, I just throw it here on the ground, and now just step back a little. So, yes. Now look at this belt device. If you now touch these two touch surfaces here, the warning device will set itself on fire and turn into a mushy and brown-black plastic mass. Look at the device lying there and operate the two touch surfaces.
I allow myself to operate it. Fabulous, this thing really does smoke. Does it really burn to ashes?
Sure, if you let it burn long enough.
Can I have the leftovers? You know, I want them analyzed.
Sure, but then you should extinguish the mass, otherwise nothing remains. But do not touch it until 112 hours have passed, because until then certain radiations caused by the fire are escaping.
Well, do you not think that our scientists can analyze important things out of the stuff?
This possibility is very small, because this type of plastic, which no longer reveals its original composition, is probably common on the Earth in a similar form.
Contact Report 063.
How would it be, however, if you were to lend me your radiation gun sometime? You know, it would be huge fun if you could see in the movie that I had one of those things in my hands, pointing at a small tree, and without seeing anything, the tree just falls over.
For unknowing ones, it should certainly be exciting. I will really think about it. It might actually be a lot of fun.
I recently met a seemingly nice person, a Carlo Dish from Ticino. He also prepared a report for me according to which he is said to have had contact with a certain Eloa of Cassiopeia in 1960, as he also writes here in this report.
Very few Cassiopeia planets carry human life forms, and I know very few friends there. An Eloa, however, is unknown to me on those worlds, but rather a similar name, namely Elhoa. But perhaps it is a misunderstanding of Carlo Dish, in that he misheard the name.
I just find it quite squalid that especially these two poor jerks, Michael Ahrens and Mario Bertossi, have to drag you into the dirt and claim that you want to capture and subjugate the Earth.
This assertion must testify to the truly boundless stupidity and primitiveness of these two men. For if we had ever had such actions in our minds, we would have realized such plans long ago, when Earthlings had no defensive weapons. On the other hand, even today's still very primitive weapons would not frighten us, thus there would be no obstacles to overcome. So why should we wait into the distant future if we wanted to conquer the Earth? Only very ill and still quite stupidly primitive brains are therefore able to hatch such nonsense, but not a brain that is already subject to intellectually based rationality. And those who believe such irrational, lying, and dirty lies are not much better off either. Every human being on the Earth, on the other hand, must always do this himself or herself for the fulfillment of their duty, out of their own determination, and therefore independently of us. Never must anything in any form be dependent on us, which is why this is another reason why, as a rule, we only make ourselves visible to a few humans, beings on Earth. But this only happens when they have become aware of our existence. As little as you are ever allowed to act as a teacher, as little may we show ourselves, because only in this manner is it, and will it be, guaranteed that the Earth humans will become independent, start to think and act in their own form, in the right form, and acquire the true knowledge and freedom within and without. But if we were to show ourselves, and if you were to act as a teacher, the human beings of the Earth would once again fall into belief and remain stuck in their evolution. In that manner, nothing would be achieved, and the Earth human would not become free and independent. So the only way is that he or she is only given the basic rules of the laws and recommendations with their explanations, which he or she must, however, compile in their own thought work towards the truth and towards the knowledge. Any delivery of evidence, other than those which we have given you for evaluation, would therefore be completely out of place, for if a form of life depends only on so-called evidence of a matter, then this means nothing more than a new belief. Knowledge, truth, and wisdom, however, cannot be acquired through such proofs, but only through one's own work of thought and through the attainment of inner clarity, through an inner creation of proof in truth. His Svat's ship was a gift from Assyrian people.
You mean from people of Sirius?
Sure, from one of the two inhabited planets of Sirius, but in a different space-time continuum.
Ah, that is what I have wanted to ask you for a long time, if there are inhabited worlds somewhere.
Sure, those two, each belonging to two separate solar systems.
Contact Report 064.
The Earth human today is not yet capable of dedicating himself or herself to our concerns regarding us and our ship's existence in honest, open, and real form. These so-called ufologists, who were meant to spread the truth and pave the way for the coming of extraterrestrial intelligences, have degraded themselves to primitive semi-scientific sects and spread their unintelligent and dirty nonsense of self-created theories and lies, thereby distancing the Earth humans further and further from the truth on a global level instead of leading them towards the truth. This fact shows that the Earth human does not yet have enough real and truly knowing powers to prepare for the coming of extraterrestrial intelligences by a purposeful elucidation. Regarding his Carlo Dish's statement that he had had contact with an LHOA at the beginning of the 60s, 1962, I was only able to find out that at that time there were actually 2 Cassiopeian ships with several crew members on the Earth for about 4 months, which had also made impulse telepathic contact with 2 Earth humans. However, all recordings were not transmitted on the home planet, but recorded in the storage devices of the ships for reasons inexplicable to us. Unfortunately, however, our research has now revealed that one of the ships was destroyed during the return flight to the home star in 1962 with the entire crew, whereby all records were also destroyed. The reasons of the destruction are shrouded in darkness and could not be clarified because it took place in hyperspace, which was determined at that time by coordinate impulses. The second ship started from the Earth about 7 years ago, because the crew was expeditionarily busy until then. They had, however, no knowledge about the records of the destroyed ship, so also they could convey nothing of reference to this to the homeworld. Unfortunately, this ship did not reach home either, because some influences threw the ship into a foreign dimension when it wanted to break hyperspace. This resulted in the fact that all control devices of the home base, which were coupling remotely with the devices of the ship, suddenly did not pick up any impulses anymore when the breakthrough should have taken place, which indicates with compelling clarity that the ship was thrown into a foreign dimension. What is known about the 2 ships is that the destroyed aircraft was commanded by a male leader named El-Hoa, while the missing ship was under the command of a certain Anhar.
Recently, Manara came and visited me quite unexpectedly when I was strolling around in the woods outside. She lent me her radiation gun, with which I shaved away some small trees in a matter of seconds by heat rays.
Contact Report 065.
Meanwhile, it was possible for me to take care of the concerns of El-Hoa and Carlo Dish. In connection with a station on Proxima Centauri, it turned out that all El-Hoa's records are stored there. The records say that El Hoa was in brief contact with 2 Earthlings. A Carlo dish, however, was not one of them.
Contact Report 066.
I am so happy.
Where do you want to put this fuzzy bear, present from Herbert Runkle? Do you not have any things of this kind yourself?
He shall remain here in the ship as a constant reminder of the solidarity and the certainty that we also have love and good friends on the earth.
Okay, and what about my second question?
Oh yes, no, we do not have things like that.
The question whether you also have a certain symbol for Era, and that you draw it.
Sure, we have a symbol for Era, like for all the other planets and the stars. Sure. Now look here. So, you see, this is the symbol for Era.
But tell me, I find this sign quite strange. It has so much in common with those symbol signs we have for our planets and the sun. How is that possible? And above all, what does this sign mean?
I already explained to you that your planetary and celestial symbols trace back to our ancestors, who made them according to the vibration and radiation values of the individual planets and the relevant celestial bodies. In other words, this means that the signs were made according to the individual celestial and planetary state of evolution, so that each individual sign records the state of evolution or the level of evolution of the respective celestial body and planet. This is also true for Era, my home planet, whose signs are composed of various ancient symbols of our ancestors. That is to say, the same signs that were used for the stars, the galaxy central sun and your sun, as well as for the planets of the Solar System, and are now common again with you, except for the symbol of the galactic central sun. The lying form of our symbol now represents the middle between above and below, the balanced. Note, a further explanation by Martin Sorge of the symbol for planet Era can be found in Contact Report 66. See also planet symbols. The generating of jealous possession thinking depends exclusively on the form of the level of consciousness and on the emotions. It is universally uniform and thus not earthbound, whereby I would like to emphasize, however, that on Era, these lower levels of consciousness no longer exist, and jealousy is no longer known to our people, or, as I better can explain, no longer pertains, because in earlier times our peoples also had to go through these stages.
How do you think about marriage? Is there then a right to the partner?
If 2 people join together to form a marriage bond, this does not mean a taking possession of the partner, but simply that they join together in a bond. So there are no rights of ownership, but only love, understanding, and joy in the pleasure of the other. Each partner remains completely free in his or her own actions and in allowing the laws and recommendations to be fulfilled, while in purely conjugal actions and letting things be, as in decisions, etc., one acts in mutual agreement with all interests. In the fulfillment of the laws and recommendations in an evolutive sense and in every respect concerning this, mutual clarifications and agreements are necessary, which is given by certain rules of order. I, like my people, are human beings like your Earth humans. We also have feelings and fine spiritual perceptions such as love, friendship, sympathies, and antipathies, just as they are also characteristic of you, Earth humans. In certain respects, however, they are much finer than with you, more sensitive and more profound. Over the past centuries, this has led us to exercise too much control over them and to learn to encapsulate our feelings. We assumed that we had to do this to protect ourselves from those more advanced. This is because in the course of the evolution, all fine spiritual perceptions and feelings refine and therefore require more intensive control in the higher realms. This intensification expands in the same measure as the entire concomitant material development and proves everything worthy that can be grasped. Thus also, the love and the desire to be together with others of equal evolution becomes more and more pronounced. But also, the less developed are considered equally because simply the desire for them inexorably occurs. So these feelings are not replaced by knowledge and intellectual activity, but result from them. These feelings can only be created and brought to bear through knowledge and the activity of the intellect. Therefore, it is also not the case that certain tasks cause a change in the feeling realm, because since these are highly developed and controlled, they cannot be classified as changes other than those of further evolution. However, this is different with the Earth human, whose development in these areas is still rather low, and why he or she can be influenced by fields of activity. After which, for example, with a prison guard, aggressive changes of feeling appear. We made the mistake of controlling our feelings too much, which meant that we made analyses according to pure probability values. This was wrong, which we realized very soon after your acquaintance. You, who often lets yourself be guided only by your feelings. This showed that it was wrong to encapsulate our feelings from more profoundly developed intelligences through an all-too-tight control, which is why this damage was repaired in the course of the last year. It was already clear from this that the blocking of the feelings expanded and began to have an effect in one's own ranks. So we found our way back, through you, in time, and were able to correct the evil in a few months before an evolutionary blockade of feelings would have certainly appeared, as is the case with other peoples.
You mean with those who belong to your cosmic federation?
No, that is not the case. These phenomena do not exist among our peoples and races. The people of Era are the most developed in the Federation and are therefore the most advanced in these matters. A comprehensive council decision has averted the evil, whereby attention will be paid in the future also to the fact that still more lower developed peoples and races do not make the same mistake. I therefore speak of alien races and peoples alien to us in the vast universe.
And what about the question here about passion, etc.?
Depending on the state of evolution of the consciousness, these concerns also change, because as a rule, passions, sobriety, and coolness are based on the consciousness-based level of evolution, since they are special character traits of a certain development. So also among our peoples and races, there are enormous differences in this respect, as it is also the case on the Earth. In this respect, the Erins are also ever fundamentally different among themselves, because passions and similar phenomena only diminish with the dissolution of the physical body, only that exactly these become more and more refined depending on the higher development of the consciousness. Realm, as long as it is still present, however, as well as the physical body still exists. With us, however, the passions are no longer to be found in the form in which they are still deeply and wildly anchored in you Earth humans.
That is to be understood. We are still the barbarians after all. But after your statement, I would now like to conclude that on average, you Erins are still quite the same in your emotions as we barbarians, even if everything is refined and sensitized in you, right?
Certainly. What is correct is that through the discussion and explanation of these things, more understanding is created for the fact that we Erins are human beings like their terrestrial counterparts. Furthermore, I have to inform you that recently more and more extraterrestrial intelligences are sending robot and android manned ships to the Earth in order to be expeditionally active here. This has been the case for many years now, But this activity is currently being greatly increased, and Earth humans are often used as experimental and test objects.
Contact Report 069.
As I once explained to you, the last decisive settlement of the Earth by extraterrestrial intelligences took place about 13,500 Earth years ago. Note, see Easter Island, Maui.
I should not have asked you about it. You seem to be somber now.
Your question once again made it very clear to me how little we know despite our enormous knowledge.
Wednesday morning you sent me out at DO023 ARs to look at something that had gone down at a certain place. 3 of us found a track in the snow in a clearing in the woods, which obviously had to come from a ship. The snow had melted within a radius of about 3.50 meters, with 4 points outside the circle pointing to landing supports or something similar. To our astonishment, we also found a lot of small footprints, not more than 23 centimeters long, leading from the ship's tracks to a small pond, back to the ship's tracks, and then to another water pond, where the same small footprints then also led into the forest and back again to the ship's tracks. The craziest thing, however, was that we found 2 such footprints in the middle of the snow, about 100 meters away from the ship's track, without another trail leading there. It just seemed as if someone had flown through the air and only stepped into the snow quickly for 2 steps.
These visitors are very small people, only 110 centimeters tall, height 3.6 feet. They inhabit a small planetary world in a galaxy that was previously unknown to us. They came to Earth by an involuntary time shift, by a faulty manipulation of their still insufficient space technology. Equipped as an expedition ship, it is commanded by scientists, one of whom went out of the ship to fetch plants, ice, and water from the water points you mentioned to analyze them, while another went into the forest to collect material there as well. Meanwhile, a third one, moving with a hovering device, secured the surroundings to be safe from unforeseen surprises. Due to an accident, however, he once hovered too close above the ground, leaving the 2 footprints you had found.
Oh, that is how it is. But where are these dwarves now? Can they even go back to their homeland? You said that they came here because of a time difference, just because of an unwanted one. That does mean that they have been thrown out of their own time, right?
Sure, but they will find their homeland again, because Father brings them back to their time and to their home world through a leap in time. But this still offers some difficulties, because we still have no information about their home galaxy, which is why we first have to work out the coordinates.
Then good luck. But tell me, why and at what time did these dwarves land in that forest?
They landed there because a small impulse transmitter of ours is installed very close to that place, which serves as orientation for our telemeter ships. They registered these impulses and subsequently descended there.
Contact Report 070 Note. The following excerpts explain how some ancient Pleiadian ancestors found their way to Earth. See also Contact Report 5, S67-193, Contact Report 9, S120-170, and Contact Report 121, B79-90.
But now the other thing, where we are also interested in the history of the Aryans, if you know anything about it. Start where the earliest ancestors were still in their original home.
At the beginning of our contacts, I have already mentioned in detail the history of the destruction and reconstruction of the original home worlds.
Excuse me, you mean the destruction of worlds, etc. by the destroyer? Where was that, actually?
Sure, that is what I am talking about. The later original homeworlds were planets in the constellation known to you as Lyra and near Vega, in a different space-time structure, which is shifted from yours by a fraction of a second. Few of the worlds there are still inhabited today by different races, all belonging to our wide alliance. Our early ancestors had mastered space travel for more than 22 million years, carried out expeditions and exploratory flights reaching far into space, and came to Earth for the first time. However, the Earth, was still deep in the late primordial development and was therefore left to time for the further development. Nonetheless, Earth was often revisited to release criminal elements, humans, that were detrimental on the homeworlds. Only a few millennia. However, did this last? And then, for reasons unknown to us, they relinquished the Earth and left this world alone for many millions of years, during which life of all kinds, already developed on Earth, could continue to develop in a natural sense, except that at later times, the abandoned life forms mixed with human-like life forms already on Earth, which happened for the first time a few million years ago. Millions of years went by as the primeval races spread far into space, also developed themselves in a consciousness-based manner and acquired great powers. But not yet mastering control of these, they were used to doing evil things and became evil for many worlds. During the primeval catastrophes caused by the Destroyer, 2/3 of humankind were destroyed on the very early original homeworlds in another level of the universe. Through hardship and privation, however, they soon found a new beginning, so they were able to build a new civilization and culture in less than 9 centuries. By working and researching together, they created a very great technology, which reached further than anything they had ever seen before. At the same time, they also developed their consciousness, the powers of which they were not yet able to control. So the time came when they built themselves flying ships, with which they could also leave their space-time structure and could rush through the free and wide space of the levels of the universe. These were flying apparatuses of disc-like form and with beam drives. With these devices, they flew out into the vastness of the universe, to other solar systems and planets, which they had expeditions to and colonized, either peacefully or through murderous wars. Often, with evil violence, they created new life possibilities and new living space for themselves, because they needed it, due to the proliferation of the human beings of their peoples. It was especially the scientists who searched space for ever new worlds and solar systems, and it was no problem for them because their ships were equipped with all technological possibilities, which made them absolute rulers. Their weapons were of immense power and prowess, so battles with whole peoples of foreign worlds were only very short and one-sided, in favor of the conquerors. In particular, the scientists recognized, in the course of time, the unlimited possibilities of their consciousness-based powers, so they pushed and expanded them by immense accumulations of knowledge until they became a matter of course for them, and they swung themselves even higher up, whereby they soon became absolutely dominant over their peoples. According to their great knowledge, they were called Jeshwish-ish-wish, which is synonymous with the name God, which is familiar to you and which means King of Wisdom. The Jeshwish, far superior to all people in terms of knowledge and ability, subjugated all life forms, cast a spell over them, and ruled them in a dictatorial form. For several centuries, exactly after 864 years of today's terrestrial era, the people rose up in a revolution that at first smoldered underground, but this led to the Jeshwish taking violent measures and trying to nip everything in the bud, which did not succeed completely. The Domineers killed innumerable human beings or simply eliminated them completely with their terrible weapons, so that not a single speck of dust remained. This, however, increased the anger of the people and underground, they were secretly preparing for battle. Preparations took 4 long centuries in secret form to break out in one sudden blow into a far-reaching and open war of liberation, which spread and dragged on over many other dimensioned worlds of the Lyra and Vega systems. More than 60% of all things of cultural value were destroyed and completely demolished. Some races were completely wiped out, while others were only able to survive with extreme hardship. 3 worlds of the Lyra systems were simply completely eliminated and dissolved into energy by a novel process that is now also under development on the Earth in its very beginnings. Earth humans already call this insane weapon according to its deadly value, namely, overkill. Still as a fantasy product of a perfect technology, this weapon of total elimination, which is in research and construction by scientists, has already found entrance into various books and films describing this cruelest of all weapons in futuristic novels to save Earth humans from the last madness. According to the terrestrial calendar, the event of the outbreak of the War of Liberation in the Lyra and Vega systems dates back some 230,000 years. The commander-in-chief of the terrorizing forces was an Jeshwish called Asiel, who, after realizing the hopelessness of the struggle, escaped the vengeful and victorious peoples by a quick escape into the space-time structure of this level of the universe. Secretly, he managed to seize a powerful fleet of 183 large ships and 250 space reconnaissance ships with a total crew of 360,000 human beings, and to escape under the most severe combat actions. They quickly left the home systems, only to wander through the again-shifted space-time structures for many restless years, before one day they found a large star system which offered them the necessary possibilities for life far away from their original home systems. The new star system encompassed 3,000 light-years and 254 partly still young and therefore blue shining suns, which partly, however, already had their own planetary systems with only a few habitable planets. The whole star system was named after the leader of the escape fleet, namely according to your word value Asiel's system. After taking possession of this young star system, where various planets had been made habitable by the Titanic fugitives over the course of 300 years, and a new humanity had been created, they set out again in larger groups to explore space and develop new habitats. Of the 3 worlds made habitable, various expedition ships were equipped, after which the Titan fugitives flew out into the vastness of space to reach and take possession of their predetermined destination after 17 years. These were stars and planets in their dimension beyond those stars known to you as Hesperides, which have their own worlds circling around them, and were only weakly inhabited by human life forms, which were subjugated by the conquerors. During 2 centuries, a new culture was created on these differently dimensioned Hesperid worlds and inhabited by emigrants from the Asel system. Another 70 years later, Asel walked the path of all transience. He died. He was succeeded by his daughter Pleiarya, and Jeshrish, female queen of knowledge or goddess, and consequently the home system, the Asel system, was also renamed the Pleiarya system, because for the human beings of that time, who were Titans, symbolization was still very much in force, as it still is today with the human beings of the earth, which corresponds to a perverse illogicity. Under the supreme command of the new leader, Pleiarya, further expeditions were prepared to expedite a very distant and lonely solar system located in this, your space-time plane, which according to all calculations must have come into possession of a section of a planet from the original earliest home systems, after the destroyer had destroyed the earliest original homeworlds many millions of years ago. According to the calculations, however, the destroyer itself must also have taken the same orbit. Thus, it had been changed in its orbit by the sun of the distant system and had been introduced into the system in a recurring orbit. These calculations were like a hint for the Titans, which is why they set off for the distant system, not knowing that their ancestors had already flown to this system and abandoned undesirable elements on a world millions of years before, namely on the Earth, your home world. So the expedition ship set off again, and after many years reached the SOL system, where they forced 3 different planets under their rule and began to build a new culture. However, these planets, Earth, Melona, and Mars, were still extremely inhospitable and hostile to life, so the majority of the expedition fleet left the worlds again after a few years, leaving only a few behind, who slowly faded away and joined the animal-looking feral descendants of those earlier abandoned ones millions of years ago, as well as the pure Earth-born ones. The scientists of the Pleyarya system, like their earliest ancestors, left the Earth to its natural development, making expeditions and monitoring visits only here and there, and then leaving the human beings who had become completely wild and were now left there to their hard fate. This lasted many thousands of years. Then, when the idolism had been abolished in the Pleyarya systems and the leader Pleyarya had died, a new intelligence developed on the Earth through the descendants of the feral abandoned ones, which led to the fact that the Pleyarya system inhabitants, who were constantly observing the Earth, came forward with new expeditions to Earth and once again built up a culture in the same manner as they built up a culture on the 4th planet, namely on the world of Melona. Still very barbarically inclined, however, power struggles broke out again among the new settlers after less than 300 years, which led to the fact that the Earth had to be vacated by an order under force from the home systems. Melona, on the other hand, remained inhabited because the population there remained peaceful. But this only lasted for barely 40 years, and then the greed for power among the 2 different peoples also took hold there, and before any orders could be made from the home systems, the Melonians destroyed each other and destroyed the whole planet. Since then, the debris of the once beautiful planet between Mars and Jupiter has been orbiting the SOL, the system's sun, as a long-lasting memorial to human madness. 78. From the home worlds, the development of the Earth has been constantly monitored, and expeditions have been sent to it year after year. From the home worlds, the development of the Earth has been constantly monitored, and expeditions have been sent to it year after year. Again and again, attempts were also made to repopulate this very beautiful world, but these failed miserably time and again over the course of more than 800 years. All kinds of life forms were deported to Earth, also those you would call prisoners, to simply abandon them there and leave them to their fate. Robbed of all technology, it was inevitable that they would wither and become overgrown, mixed again with the overgrown descendants of earlier elements and with Earth humans, and became bestial. But then the time finally came when the great enterprise was finally taken up. With several hundred large and small spaceships, the Earth was once again approached and seized. A great culture was built up, which lasted for 600 years before the greed for power among the highly ambitious scientists increased again and led to new terrible acts of war, whereby once again everything was destroyed to the last. The Earth reverted to its old existence, where life forms continued to exist, but quickly became wild. For 400 years, the Earth was completely unnoticed and left to its own devices before it was approached again. This time, however, it was no longer an attempt at an expedition, but once again an escape. On the homeworlds in the Pleiades star systems, power struggles broke out once again between the ascending scientists and the peoples, who were enslaved by their terrible weapons and other means. Note: sentences 89 to 138 have additional explanations given in Contact 703 by Ptah. But while on all three homeworlds the vicious battles of annihilation raged, a large group of dissident scientists came together under the leadership of a certain Pelagon, who already had the status of an Ishwish. This was the Titan Pelagon the Imperious, who was a power leader of the Hammud dynasty, which ruled over all the Plei-Aran peoples of all the Plei-Aran planets until before the creation of peace some 52,000 years ago. Under his leadership, 70,000 human beings were gathered, including many scientists who seized various spaceships and fled the Plei-Arya planets. According to the coordinates of old records, the refugees entered this space-time structure and the SOL system, and thus once again arrived on Earth, where the Titans once again settled. According to earthly time calculation, this was about 190,000 years ago, about 194,170 years. The unpeaceful, warlike times triggered by Pelagon the Commanding and continued by all his successors for some 39,000 years meant that peace and tranquility did not arrive until some 150,000 years ago, but they did not last long. Millennia later, some 6,000 years after the establishment of peace, tranquility, and freedom, however, a scientist and distant descendant of Pelagon the Commanding, named Pelagon the Militant, again set out, in imitation, to likewise rise in rebellious fashion as the leader of a 70,000-strong fighting force in thrall to him. These fighting units were a 70,000-strong fighting force out of 7 since time immemorial, permanently mobile for security operations and combat actions, each under the command of a Hammud dynasty leader appointed for the purpose. Pelagon the Commanding was a great ancestor of Pelagon the Militant, who some 40,000 years later, that is to say, some 150,000 years ago, equally brought a 70,000-strong fighting unit under his command and fled to the Dern universe. This occurred while his son, Pelagon the Marshal, was seizing power on the home planets at the same time. Pelagon the Marshal was a scientist and surrounded by many followers and also leader of another 70,000-strong Hammud dynasty fighting force, with which he plunged worlds into warfare again, as was then continued by all his numerous successors. These periods of strife then continued for more than 100,000 years. When Pelagon the Militant, the father of Pelagon the Marshal, seized several capital ships with the help of his combat unit and fled, the dimensional gate had already existed at that time for about 30 million years, which he used and transported with his combat unit to various inhabited solar, that is to say, planetary systems in the Dern universe, and finally also reached Earth. Here, however, in the course of time, feuds and campaigns of conquest broke out among a part of the fighters, as well as acts of war were carried out, after which it was finally decided by a part of the prudent ones that no longer a longer stay on the planet should be allowed for the fighters. So, following the death of Pelagon the Marshal, who was killed in hostilities, a general forced departure from Earth of the unruly and quarrelsome outcasts took place, with the destruction of everything that indicated their former existence. But the outcasts fled to distant systems where they resettled, while those who remained on Earth fell under the command and Hammud leadership of Pelagon the Patriarchal. On the home planets, the vicious war was fought to the bitter end and the scientists were put in their place. The form of government was abolished and placed in the hands of spiritual leaders who proclaimed anew the long-forgotten spiritual teaching and taught the peoples. These recognized the value of the teaching, took it to their own hands, and henceforth lived according to it, after which they found final peace some 50,000 years ago, and henceforth lived according to the law and recommendation of absolute creational determination, which has been preserved until today and will never change again. The times of strife and war ended only about 52,000 years ago, when the unrest and battles were finally fought out for the last time, ended, and all the troublemakers and warmongers were finally put in their place, and then final peace, freedom, and tranquility were created. So the unrest and warfare, which, after the short period of peace lasting only about 6,000 years, 150,000 years ago, lasted again for more than 100,000 years, after which, about 52,000 years ago, the peace, freedom, and tranquility, which has lasted until today and will certainly last in the future, was actually created. However, during the 100,000 years of unrest and warfare, many events also followed, which were triggered by the refugees under Pelagon the Militant on Earth, where they had found their way. After the death of Pelagon the Militant, other Hammud leaders took over his legacy, after which the early refugees and their successors went in and out of Earth from 150,000 years ago until 52,000 years ago, and were also temporarily resident on Earth. In the course of the next 8,000 years, the Playaran peoples, as they were referred to from then on, developed to a very high spiritual and consciousness-based level. Consequently, they allied themselves with all kinds of foreign and their own peoples in near and far systems, and lived now only in the harmonious evolution. Thus they developed together into a great alliance, in the course of which they carried out new expeditions and, 51,951 years ago, found in the galaxy of Andromeda a half-spirit world inhabited by half-spirit beings, an already extremely highly developed life form, which existed and exists only half materially, but therefore already half spiritually. In best agreement with these life forms, everything was resolved that they should in future guide the destinies of their peoples and their great covenant with their gigantic knowledge and wisdom, which was joyfully welcomed by all peoples. Consequently, in agreement with the spiritual leaders, who were human life forms and spiritual teachers, it was decided that all destinies of the future should be guided by these half-spiritual forms which had become best friends. The form of guidance should be that of a counsel from a higher spiritual level, which is why this guidance and advice was referred to as the High Council, which has survived to this day and will never change again. Since then, all folks of all races connected to us have been under the guidance of the High Council, which never gives any orders, but only a High Council, which is optional for each individual form of life to follow, and which as a rule is also followed without exception. Those who fled to the earth knew nothing of the end of the wars for the time being. These refugees were Titans, and the most distant descendants of the 70,000 refugees of Pelagon the Imperious, who brought them from the Playaran planets to the Dern universe and the Sol system to Earth more than 190,000 years ago. In the joy of their newly won freedom, they gladly submitted to the tight regime of Pelagon, who had chosen 200 scientists as sub-leaders and deployed them according to their fields of knowledge. Pelagon the Patriarchal was the first successor leader to carry on the legacy of Pelagon the Commanding, who was then followed by various other Hammud leaders. Under their leadership emerged large cities with other inhabited areas, and a very high culture developed on all the continents of the earth, which had resulted from continental shifts over about 300 million years. For about 10,000 years, harmony and peace reigned, but then again an Jashwish called Jesus came out, who murdered Pelagon's successor and seized power over all the, by then, united different folks and races. 20 years later, however, the folk rose up against Jezah, and a terrible and worldwide war broke out again over the earth by those who had traveled farther. Many hundreds of thousands fled with large and small ships into free space, set down and settled in another space-time structure in Beta Centaurus, which you know in your space-time structure as the Barnard star. This was not in the Dern universe space-time structure, but in the one where the Pleiaren planets also exist. A few million humans remained on the Earth, where everything that had been built by the extraterrestrial humans had been completely destroyed and totally eliminated. Those left behind, deprived of all technical and other cultural possibilities by the complete total destruction, gradually fell into a wicked lethargy, atrophied, and became wild beings in a nasty barbarism. All knowledge of their original origins and highly developed technology was lost, and their former high development of consciousness atrophied almost completely, with the result that in the course of time, the 2.5 million feral titans largely exterminated themselves and became cannibals. For 700 years, the Earth was simply avoided, before the descendants of the fugitives set out again to populate the beautiful blue world again. These new arrivals, or the distant descendants of those who had left the Earth earlier, were on the one hand not titans, but human beings of smaller dimensions. But they too were not exactly of a peaceful nature, but nevertheless no longer as warlike as their ancestors. This was 133,000 Earth years ago, according to your current chronology. The returnees were led by an Jashwish with the name Atlant, married to an Jashwish named Caryatide. In the latest episode, under the leadership of Atlant, the continent of Atlantis, which had been headed for again and again, and used for millennia, was expanded and made habitable, while under the command of his wife Caryatide, Lesser Atlantis came into existence, as at the same time her cousin Muras built the gigantic city of Mu, which, like Atlantis, also found its origin in very early times. The reason for the construction of these cities so far apart was that the humans had become cleverer through all the wars and hoped for peace as a result of the great distance between the cities, if everyone stayed in their domains. So it went well for many long years, a whole 1,800 years to be precise. Then, however, again some scientists exalted themselves, whipped up by lust for might, and tried to snatch up control for themselves. After the death of Atlant, his wife Caryatide and Muras, various other leaders took over. This time, however, they had not reckoned on the people's memory of war, which had been passed down over the ages. The lore was only maintained by those who returned, but not by those who remained on Earth, who were deprived of all achievements and values by a complete destruction of all technical, cultural, and other things, whereby they finally gradually withered away and became savage beings who fell into barbarism and eventually died out. So before the scientists could strike, the folk rose up against them. Through an accomplice, the scientists obtained possession of spaceships and fled into the space-time shifted regions of Beta Centauri. This was 115,000 Earth years ago. After 2,000 years, during which the malicious refugees again created a high technological standard and produced many descendants, they returned filled with hate to the Earth, after they had increased their hate immeasurably against the extraterrestrial inhabitants of the Earth, and were only able to preserve order within their own ranks with terrible punishments. Spurred on through their inhuman hate, they, through research and the knowledge obtained from it, drove up their life expectancy to more than 1,000 years. Their single wish was, however, to gain control over the earth, for which reason every individual was taught wicked intrigues and was instructed in the craft of war. After 2,000 years, this hate-drenched people was so far along that it could venture an attack on the earth. Therefore, it manned its ships and came newly to the earth, and indeed under the leadership of the Jeshvish Aris, the barbarian. This happened 103,000 years ago. Aris was extremely bestial and barbarous in his disposition, and his power was feared. Like Pelagon, already thousands of years before, Aris also had 200 high-level scientists with him, who he made sub-leaders. In a lightning action, they fell upon the earth, robbing, murdering, and taking possession of the land. Primarily, they conquered the distant land in the northern regions, where the climate was moderate and very good. These were those regions, which are traditionally known to you as Hyperborea, and which were far in the north, before an upset of the earth shifted its axis, so that the then regions exist today where you name Florida. Coming from the north, Eris's son, Eris II, set out and fell upon those lands which today you call India, Pakistan, and Persia, and so forth, whereby they struck the earliest forefathers of the Sumerians, who, peace-loving, fled and set down far in the south, folk of dark-colored skin, but by your terms, not Negroid, but like Europeans and of tall growth, risen from a race of former Syrian refugees, who had likewise settled on the earth 133,000 years ago, as did the refugees from the Pleiaren system. Named after Aris II, the India of today was at that time called Aryan, which, however, split off from Hyperborea after a few centuries, after 210 years, to be exact, and joined with the inhabitants of Mu and Agartha, while from Hyperborea, Aris I constantly troubled Mu and Greater Atlantis by wicked war activities in order to become their ruler. During around half a millennia, or said very precisely, during 502 years, those war machinations continued, until Eris I, who in the meanwhile had become old and weak, succeeded in infiltrating wicked elements of his hater humans into the leading controlling ranks of Atlantis and Mu, who secretly stirred up violence and hate for so long, as also did their descendants over several centuries, until, through boundless intrigues, Mu and Atlantis were able to be completely destroyed some centuries later, while the only few survivors were beaten into servitude. However, great scientists, in knowledge of the coming things and conscious of their powerlessness, set off in spaceships and fled towards the early homeworlds in the Pleiaren systems, where they were affably received. Only small peoples remained on Earth, whose ancestors had long since mixed with early Earth humans who had emerged from Earth's development and created their own cultures. I indeed do not need to speak yet again about the destruction of Atlantis and Mu, because you will find that as a separate chronicle in the explanations given to you. So it only remains for me to report that Eris XI, as a very distant descendant of Eris I, was murdered in his old age many thousands of years later, and around 100,000 years after the destruction of Mu and Atlantis, by his third-born son Jehavan, after which this one took over command of the Hater people, in order to rule these and 3 earthly peoples and the Hyperboreans himself. The one Earth folk consisted of the very distant descendants of the Armis folks who had lived where the region of Armenia is today. These were descendants of the Jeshvish Armis, who settled there with his race 133,000 years ago after he had emigrated from the Pleiaren systems. These descendants were already genetically aligned with Earth humans in such a way that their primordial origin was no longer ascertainable, consequently their original origin from the Pleiaren, planets 133,000 years ago, and their development in terms of hereditary traits and characteristics, as well as dependent elements, could no longer be proven. The second Earth folk which fell under Jehavon's control were the descendants of the Aryans, who meanwhile had mingled themselves with the still very underdeveloped, pure earthly and lethargic native population after the Sumerians were expelled. The third Earth humans were not really such a people in themselves, because they were a very widely disseminated alliance of gypsies, which was interspersed with Jehavon's spies and saboteurs, who, in unity with the gypsies, brought about dissension everywhere, greedily drawing everything to themselves, and were always constantly eager to murder, burn and rob, for which reason one named them the Hebrons, by the original language of our forefathers, therefore Hebraean, and later then Hebrons. These names correspond to gypsy, scum and outcast in the sense of the original language, which therefore has not been transferred to your present languages, because the sense of your present term for gypsy still only means the wanderers, the itinerant, and the unsettled ones. Thereby it should be clarified that the present gypsy people have not the least in common with the Hebraeon of that time, who proclaimed themselves the firstborn and the chosen ones, just as much as do their distant descendants who today still dare to assert this. In truth, the Hebraeans were the real scum and outcasts of Earth humanity, because through them, fights and quarrels within the whole world were constantly stirred up and yet further spread, which has been maintained until the present day. Earth will only finally be at peace. Then, when this power-hungry and bloodthirsty Hebraean alliance, which has declared themselves as a people, and which has split into various sects addicted to world control and so forth, has been fully dissolved. Jehavon ruled until about 3,660 Earth years ago, until he was likewise treacherously murdered by his only son Jehav, who then snatched up rule for himself after 340 years of his father's reign. Jehav ruled wickedly and always screamed for blood and revenge until 320 years ago in your chronology, during which time he sired 3 sons who were named Arusem, Ptah, and Salam. Megalomaniacal like his father Jehavon, he let himself be proclaimed as creator and celebrated as such, and like his father, he caused terrible devastation among the 3 human races, and he demanded blood and death. As addicted to power as his father Jehav was also his firstborn son Arusam, who constantly wanted to take over his father's power. Thus he also finally murdered his father Jehav and wanted to snatch up the power for himself. But he failed profoundly, because his younger brother Ptah and his youngest brother Salam positioned themselves against him in order to expel and ban him into exile, because having become disgusted by the constant wars, power struggles, and bloodshed, Ptah and Salam already made an effort themselves for many decades to lead humane forms of life. Therefore, already for a long time, they assembled around themselves many like-minded ones, with whose help they gained control of Arusam and his 72,000 followers and expelled them. But Arusam secretly returned to the earth and settled down with his army in the land of Egypt, in the old cubicle constructions which had existed there unused for more than 70,000 years. Deep in the interior of the earth and deep below the pyramids, they established themselves securely, whereby they converted the rooms and buildings deep below the present pyramids of Giza as a center for their wicked purposes, from where they and their descendants since then tried to realize their tyrannical plans, but as of now without noteworthy success, although their way of obtaining the goal of deceit, lying, and intrigues was through false teachings and the leading astray of the uncorrupted earth humans through religious teachings of madness and cults, and many kinds of other evil machinations. Due to their expulsion, they, however, forfeited very much, because all possibilities for technological and otherwise scientific further development was prevented for them, as also, however, was all their research, and so forth, which thereby led to the quite rapid reduction in their life expectancy, and today still only amounts to an average of 94 years, which in relation to today's people converts to practically only about 20 years higher than the average in European regions. This means for the renegades, called the Giza intelligences by us, that they are slowly dying out, and today are still only fewer than 2,100 in number. Due to complete isolation from outer space, these remaining ones will also be no more in fewer than 3 decades, because they are all already old and no longer capable of procreation. But in spite of that, they still maliciously hold firm to their tyrannical plans, and they do not see themselves as beaten. Arusem ruled until about 3,010 years before your time reckoning began, 3010 BCE, until a powerful forced departure was secured for him by a mutineer by the name of Hen, who was called Jehovah in the tongue of the Hebraeans, and likewise also gradually within his own ranks, whereas the appellation the Cruel One was added. In the year 2080 BCE, already old and weak, he was displaced, and his nephew Kamagol I took over the evil command of the Giza intelligences in order to expand the headquarters below the surface of the Pyramid of Giza to a murderous center of power, which allowed no possibility at all of being destroyed anymore. Like no ruler before, Kamagol I forced all earthly religions under his control and created terrible cults which demanded human blood, which were able to be partially maintained until the present. All efforts from outside were in vain, as his position of power could not be broken. But also Kamagol I was only a human, so one day he met his own fate from out of his own ranks in the form of his own son, Kamagol II, who overthrew him and deprived him of power, and let him die miserably in a deep dungeon. Kamagol II was in many things even more malicious than his father, which he soon revealed, after taking over power through the introduction of monstrous mass murdering of earth-born terrestrial human beings, who he slapped under his religious power through many kinds of means. As one of the last really extremely long-lived, Kamagol II attained a great age and died a natural death just a few days ago, which we were able to ascertain just 2 days ago. He departed this world on the 27th of December, 1976, therefore around 10 days ago. The still remaining Giza intelligences, already old and weak in many cases, but still filled with hate and tyrannical plans, do not give up. But indeed, their days are numbered, so in 3 decades at the latest, they will be no more. With the Heaven's Sons, the Hyperboreans, and the emigrants from the Pleiaren system, Ptah and Salam, the sons of the murdered Jehav, led the further rule by common agreement. They governed well and created peace, and only occasionally mixed in the affairs of the earth-born earth-humans. After his 93rd year of government, Ptah was stricken by a malicious and unknown disease, from which he succumbed a few days later. Consequently, his brother Salam continued to lead the government alone, until, weak from his great age, he handed over command to his son Plejos, 240 Earth years ago, after he had taken up connections to the home worlds already centuries before, and had placed himself and his people under the home form of government, namely that of the spiritual teachers. His son Pleos was, like his father, a very wise and a kind governor, and as of 1999 years ago of earthly chronology, the home worlds, after an interruption of around 240 years, newly positioned themselves under the guidance of the High Council. He, too, arranged himself and his people therein. Respecting and following the advice of the High Council, he prepared for the long-yearned-for return to the home worlds, which took place 1,994 years ago by your chronology, after Emmanuel, at Plagios's direction, begat by the spiritual leader Gabriel, was educated as a prophet and had become right for his mission. Still to mention is that among the very distant descendants of Arus, who had subjugated the lands in the north, there existed elements in great number, who, until in the time of Jehav, preserved themselves as the Arusists. These, a group of 160,000 humans, were named the Great Aryans, because they still advocated the ideas of Eris I. They even released themselves from the powerful control of Jehav and wandered, plundering, through the land, from northwest to the east, where they penetrated into that land where in earlier times Arus II had settled with his people and expelled the Sumerians, where, in the meantime, however, the then Aryans mixed themselves with the low native population and forgot their actual origin. Also, in the meantime, the descendants of the Sumerians returned to their old homeland, so also they settled there again. But then came the Great Aryans, who moved between the Caspian Sea and Ararat and took possession of the clay-brick towns of the mixed folks, which had reached a good level of prosperity as a result of the earlier invading Aryans and the returning descendants of the Sumerians. Their work consisted mainly of trade and agriculture, which was well mastered by the Sumerian descendants. So, the appearance of the human beings and all their buildings was very orderly, and a strict discipline ruled. Indeed, even a certain submissiveness towards the highly developed Sumerian descendants, who were superior to the native people in consciousness-based development and worldliness. And exactly this world was attacked and forced into bondage and transformed and pressed into a new state structure by the Aryans, who, deprived of all technology, had been wandering for long years, coming from the far north. Deprived of all technology by Jehav's Myrmidons, the Aryans settled down in the distant lands, but in time became stunted and mixed with the natives. So soon all knowledge and ability of a higher level and of their origin disappeared into the darkness of forgetfulness.
Ha, good. But now 2 more questions, or 3, regarding our and your Pleiades. So this name comes from Njeshrish. Was it simply retained later on Earth, or was this group of stars referred to differently here?
The name was retained, but lost itself in the confusion of languages that appeared on Earth, and then, over time, returned to its original value, mainly due to mythologies.
These are probably the ancient Greek as well, right?
Sure, but there are also others, as you mentioned through the main one.
Well, then I would like to know what form of time calculation you use, at least on Era. Do you also calculate in years like we do?
Of course, because they are originally from our ancestors, so they are also given on the Earth.
Aha, and since when do you calculate? I mean, since when or when did your time calculation begin?
Since the beginning of peace on our home systems, so about 50,000 years ago.
Aha, can you give me the exact date?
Sure. Today we count the year 51,711 because there was once a break, but it was not due to war, but of reconstructive importance.
Good. And now the question of how Era got its name and when.
This is very simple. The Pleiades stars of your space-time plane are much younger than the Earth, but not so with our stars and planets, which were named only by numerical values until the time when the High Council took control. Since then, however, at the request of the High Council, our homeworlds have been called by melodious names, for example also Era, while the celestial systems are called Pleiadian or, in our case, Pleiaren.
If I think correctly, this should have happened 51,951 years ago, right?
Sure, you think correctly. But I would also like to explain to you that at this point in time, the new era was also introduced. So we have two of them. The year 51,511, which reminds us of the final peacetime, and the year 51,951, which reveals the spiritual alignment with the High Council.
Contact Report 074.
It is damn easy for you to talk, girl, because you do not have these idiotic worries about money, because you do not know such material means anymore.